In the age of information, controlling the narrative has become an art form. Government bureaucrats once existed to provide essential services, but today the focus appears to be less on providing a service for taxpayers and more on controlling that flow of information. Spin doctors, PR hacks, communication specialists. Whatever they go by, their industry is certainly blossoming. And during the pandemic, our state premiers have amassed a lot of power, and their decisions affect every single one of us. So it makes sense that they needed some help nuancing some of the more unpalatable messages. The Courier Mail recently revealed that Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk has 18 PR boffins to help her personally manage the media. Most modern newsrooms in Australia don't even have 18 journalists anymore. But if the hefty government salaries are on the taxpayer dime, there doesn't really need to be a business case for their existence. Particularly when our state leaders know that, with the right phrasing in press conferences, overzealous lockdowns, hotel quarantine bungles, and general bureaucratic failures can be repositioned in a positive light. And how did Palaszczuk justify her army of communication specialists? Well, she says this has never been more important than during the global coronavirus pandemic. Providing access to timely and accurate information continues to be just as important as we deliver Queensland's plan for economic recovery. Agreed. Accurate information is important for the public, but propaganda, well, that is downright hurtful. And this week, we saw that propaganda was in full swing when Palaszczuk tweeted false information that the United Kingdom won't allow people under 40 to take the AstraZeneca vaccine. Now, whether or not this was tweeted by the Premier or one of her expensive so-called media experts, it simply is not true. But it was used to put political pressure on Prime Minister Scott Morrison amid their feud over whether the vaccine should be taken by under 40s. And have a listen to how Palaszczuk responded when Sky News Queensland editor Ben Murphy rightly asked her why she or her staff tweeted the false news.
On your Twitter account, you said even the UK government won't allow their under 40s to get the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Yes.
That is false.
Well, there is an article that talks about under 40s to be given an alternative to the AstraZeneca.
No, but your Twitter account says that your Twitter account says clearly that the UK government won't allow it.
No, actually, you weren't here yesterday either and actually read from the articles. I'm happy to provide you a copy of that article.
I can quote your Twitter account to you if you like. You say that your Twitter account says that the UK government won't allow AstraZeneca for under 40s. The UK government will allow it for under 40s. Were you being purposely misleading?
No, definitely not.
You're saying you're not misleading the public, but clearly you put forward an assertion that is incorrect.
I came here, I read from the piece of paper, OK? I'm happy to look at that.
Bumbling, incoherent and defensive. She could simply have deleted the tweet, which she still hasn't, and made a brief apology. But she didn't, and instead she bullishly tried to defend publishing a mistruth which cannot be defended. And her clash with the media did not stop there. Channel 7 reporter Bianca Stone was asking a very fair question about the Premier's vaccine PR stunt to distract from the fact that, on her watch, a hospital COVID bungle pushed Queensland into a lockdown.
Let's public relations stunt yesterday where you had your health minister get up and say, we've tried to get all these Pfizer vaccines.
I'm sorry, I don't know your name. You haven't been...
Bianca Stone.
Oh, hi, Bianca.
It's the show
Yep.
up here on this morning.
Well, I'm not going to answer people being rude. So anyone else have a question? You are being very rude.
Incredible. Our premiers, and they are all guilty of this, have forgotten their place if they think they can strip citizens of their civil liberties and face no tough questions from the public. Bianca Stone may have been pushy in her questioning, but that's only because the Premier was attempting to avoid her and instead just throw questions to soft journalists before disappearing without answering anything of substance. You, the people, deserve much better than being treated with secrecy and obfuscation when the leaders confine you to your homes at the first sign of an outbreak. You deserve answers, not contempt. Now let's bring in the panel. Joining me tonight is media writer at The Australian, Sophie Ellsworth, and we have federal political editor at the Daily Telegraph, James Morrow. James, all that money on PR people, 18 of them, was it worth it? Have they trained her in how to deal with the media?
Well, you'd think that, with that many people there, they could have actually given her a bit of decent media training. But it seems like these days, Jack, you don't actually need to have, an effective media performance. All you need to do is just have a few tools in your toolkit if you are a premier who wants to duck questions. And they're very simple. They're ones like well, I think you're being very rude. I'm going to move on to the next question. That's one thing that they can do. Another one, which I'm a huge fan of, because it's a great tell, and every single premier, prime minister, public health officer has the same response whenever you get them on something that's just too tricky for them. They say, can I remind you, Jack, that we're in the middle of a pandemic and X million people have died and X million people have gone to hospital, and make you the bad guy as the reporter for daring to question their wisdom and the wisdom of whatever inane restriction or mandate or whatever it is that they're trying to do to you next in the pursuit of their eradication strategy.
Yeah, look, Sophie, it's such a good point, isn't it? The other line they throw out is, well, it's the health advice. We're not going to release the health advice, but we don't have to answer this question because if you're daring going against us, then you're going against the health advice.
That's right, Jack. I mean, whoever's managing Miss Palaszczuk's social media better start looking for a new job if that tweet came from them and not directly from her. But one of the responses that he's always said down here in the Victorian press conferences with Premier Daniel Andrews, when he gets into a tight spot, he says to journalists, I'll come back to you. He just avoids answering it and pushes that under the carpet. And this is what we're seeing in these press conferences. When these premiers get a bit hot under the collar, they turn on the journalist. I mean, that was so patronising with Bianca Stone to ask who on earth is she, and then just say, well, you're being rude, telling her off like she's a school child. I mean, it's just absurd, but it shows when it gets hot in the kitchen, they can't handle it.
Yeah, look, and it shouldn't matter who Bianca Stone is, but, you know, obviously Anastasia Palaszczuk was looking for one of her mates in the media to take a bit of a softball question. She didn't recognise Bianca. And look, speaking of Victoria, obviously Daniel Andrews, he's back in his job, and he announced it with a bit of a glitzy PR campaign. Let's have a listen.
But it wasn't until they got the line into my arm and into my hand and gave me some pretty significant pain relief that things kind of settled. Look, the Ambos did a fantastic job, and I'm proud of them, and I'm grateful to them. But I've never experienced anything like this. I've never really been injured. I've never been admitted to hospital in all my life. I've never broken a bone. Everyone is taking care of us, from coppers, the guys who are with me 24/7, who are great. They're part of our family, basically. They do an amazing job.
Now, James, obviously I'm personally really happy that he's okay, that he's not injured. But when I was watching this, what jumped out at me is this emotive music and this massive following and focus that Daniel Andrews has on social media. We know over the last 5 years he's spent $800,000 of taxpayer funds bolstering that social media presence on Facebook, and it looked like a lot of production value went into that. James, is that a good use of taxpayer funds?
Well, of course not, but I think there's so much fascinating to be unpacked about this video, Jack. I mean, this is sort of like, you know, your North Korean propaganda video, but for the postmodern, soft human resources age. As you say, it's, you know, all about the soft music and the soft focus. And oh, there they are scrolling through their phones. Boy, how terrible was that in hospital? A couple of points I'd make, though, is that it is interesting that Dan Andrews has seemed to have used his time off to reflect, because he did yesterday say something that was quite sensible about no more lockdowns once everybody who has been offered the jab gets the jab or wants the jab can get it, which is actually in some ways more sensible than the phased program that we've had with no actual gate posts from the Prime Minister today. But the other thing, and this may very well cost him voters in Victoria, if you watch closely in that kitchen scene, there was Dan. He was making a coffee with one of those pod capsule coffee makers, not a proper barista thing where you grind the coffee. And I reckon in inner city Victoria, if they start noticing that, where, you know, it's all about the coffee, he's going to be in some trouble.
And Sophie, he's brought his family into this, and obviously he's got quite a lovely family. But you always see politicians, when something goes wrong, saying, leave my family out of it. But then as soon as they want a publicity hit, they're always dragging out the family. Do you think that's appropriate, having the children in there as part of this, you know, this PR blitz?
Look, this is obviously a measure by Daniel Andrews' PR spin team that is fatter than ever to make him look good. I mean, before the accident happened, he was losing ground. He was becoming very unpopular, despite still having a majority down here in Victoria. But then came out this video with his family, and now he's looking like a bit of a hero. But Jack, it's quite amazing. I mean, this man who was responsible for the hotel quarantine failures that killed 800 people had complete and utter memory loss about how it all happened in hotel quarantine, but suddenly remembered vivid memories of what went on in that accident of his fall. So that's left people questioning, but this is spin at its absolute finest, and that video dropped a few hours before the 6 p.m. news on Sunday, which is perfect timing because all the bulletins and newspapers followed up on it.
Yep, and they absolutely ate it up, didn't they, Sophie?